Antarctica is the closest thing Earth has to another planet. 98% of the continent lies under ice, some of it close to 5 kilometers thick. The average annual temperature is minus 57 degrees Celsius. Almost nothing survives on the surface. It is the driest, coldest, and most wind-exposed landmass on Earth, and a person standing in the interior could walk 1,000 kilometers without seeing anything other than white. 34 million years ago, that same ground was covered in forest. Southern beech trees formed a canopy overhead. There were birds, insects, and animals moving through the undergrowth. Antarctica was not what it is now. It was warm, it was green, and it supported a complex web of life. What follows covers what lived on that continent, how it froze, and the growing body of evidence suggesting that not everything was destroyed. For most of its geological history, Antarctica was part of Gondwana, a southern supercontinent that included South America, Africa, Australia, and India. Because these landmasses were physically connected, species moved freely between them. There were no ocean barriers and no thermal isolation. Animals that evolved in what is now South America could reach Antarctic forests over land, and vice versa. Antarctica also sat further from the South Pole than it does today, and global temperatures across the Mesozoic and early Cenozoic were substantially higher than at present. During the Eocene epoch, between roughly 55 and 34 million years ago, Antarctica's coasts and lowlands supported temperate rainforest. The dominant trees were southern beeches, Nothofagus, a genus that still grows in Patagonia, New Zealand, and Tasmania, conifers, tree ferns, and a thick understory of mosses and smaller plants filled out the canopy beneath. Fossil pollen extracted from drill cores on the Antarctic Peninsula confirms these were not thin, marginal forests clinging to favorable slopes. They were dense, multi-layered, and ecologically productive. Coastal temperatures averaged between 12 and 17 degrees Celsius, cold by tropical standards, but well within the range of present-day southern Chile or a cool Tasmanian summer. The La Meseta Formation on Seymour Island, off the Antarctic Peninsula, is one of the most significant fossil sites in the southern hemisphere. It dates to the late Eocene, and the material recovered from it amounts to a cross-section of a full, functioning ecosystem. Among the finds are marsupials, including Antarctodolops, a polydolopid related to South American lineages. These were small, likely omnivorous animals, part of a broader marsupial radiation that used the land bridges between South America and Antarctica as a corridor. They were not the only mammals. Gondwana theres, an ancient and poorly understood group with roots deep in the Mesozoic, were also present. Their exact ecological role on the continent remains unclear, but their fossils confirm that Antarctica's mammalian fauna was more diverse than a single marsupial lineage. The penguins of this period bore little resemblance to any living species. Paleodypts, one of several giant penguin genera recovered from Eocene Antarctic deposits, stood roughly 1.5 meters tall, far larger than any penguin alive today. These were dominant coastal predators, and their size alone suggests Antarctic shorelines that were rich in marine life and highly productive. The sheer number of giant penguin species found in these deposits points to an environment where large-bodied seabirds could thrive and diversify. Earlier geological periods paint an even broader picture of Antarctic biodiversity. Cryolophosaurus, a large theropod dinosaur, was recovered from early Jurassic formations near the Transantarctic Mountains. Antarctopelta, an armored ankylosaur, dates to the late Cretaceous. These were full-size dinosaurs, living and reproducing on a landmass that the modern world regards as empty. The conditions they lived in were different from today's Antarctica in almost every respect, but the fossils make the basic point clearly. This continent has a biological record stretching back hundreds of millions of years, and for the great majority of that time, it was a functioning, interconnected part of the global biosphere. The explanation for what ended that, in geological terms, is fairly straightforward. Antarctica became physically isolated, and global temperatures dropped at the same time. As long as Antarctica remained connected to South America, warm ocean currents from lower latitudes could reach its coastline and moderate temperatures at high southern latitudes. Between roughly 34 and 30 million years ago, Tectonic activity separated the two continents and opened the Drake Passage. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, open ocean lay between them. That separation had enormous consequences. With the Drake Passage open, a new current formed, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which flows around the entire continent from west to east. Driven by persistent westerly winds, it functions as a thermal wall, preventing warm water from the north from reaching Antarctic shores. The continent became enclosed in a self-reinforcing ring of cold ocean, and with no external heat source to moderate its climate, temperatures began to fall rapidly. Global atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were also declining through this period. They had fallen gradually since the early Eocene, and near the Eocene-Oligocene boundary, roughly 34 million years ago, they dropped below a critical threshold, somewhere around 750 parts per million. By modern standards, that figure does not sound low, but in the context of a planet that was already cooling and a continent that had just lost its oceanic heat supply, it was enough to tip the balance. The combined effect of thermal isolation and reduced greenhouse warming triggered the formation of the East Antarctic ice sheet, the largest single body of ice on Earth today. The pace of the transition is what stands out most in the geological record. Measured against deep time, the shift from forested continent to continental ice sheet took place within a few 100,000 years. Pollen disappears from the sediment record. Ice-rafted debris, rock fragments carried out to sea by glaciers and dropped onto the ocean floor, appears in southern ocean drill cores. The continent shed its forests, its soils, and its animal communities in what amounts to a geological instant. Nearly everything died. The word nearly is significant because the ice did not advance uniformly. Antarctica has mountain ranges, deep valleys, coastal lowlands, and geothermal hotspots, and there is growing evidence that isolated pockets of life persisted well after the main glaciation event. The strongest evidence comes from the Sirius Group, a set of sedimentary deposits high in the Transantarctic Mountains. These contain fossils of Gnathophagus, the same southern beech genus that dominated the Eocene forest, along with dwarf shrubs, mosses, and beetle fragments. The dating of these deposits has been debated for decades, and the controversy is not fully settled, but a substantial body of research now places them in the mid-Miocene, around 14 million years ago. That is roughly 20 million years after the initial glaciation. While most of Antarctica already lay under kilometers of ice, there were apparently still sheltered valleys, possibly warmed from below by geothermal heat, or shielded from katabatic winds by surrounding mountain walls, where tundra-like vegetation held on. These were not the dense rainforests of the Eocene. They were sparse, cold-adapted remnants, low shrubs and mosses in pockets of exposed ground. They were diminished in every way, but they were alive. Beneath Antarctica's ice sheet, scientists have so far identified over 400 subglacial lakes. These are bodies of liquid water trapped between bedrock below and the weight of the ice above, kept from freezing by geothermal heat rising from the Earth's interior and the insulating pressure of the overlying ice. Some of these lakes are large. Lake Vostok, the biggest known, is comparable in area to Lake Ontario and sits beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. Current estimates suggest it has been sealed from the atmosphere for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. That duration is worth registering. 15 million years of isolation with no sunlight and no atmospheric exchange. Only water, rock, geothermal heat, and darkness. When researchers analyzed accretion ice from just above Lake Vostok, the layer that slowly freezes onto the underside of the glacier as lake water refreezes against the base of the ice sheet, they recovered bacterial DNA. The sequences matched thermophilic organisms, cold-adapted bacteria, and possibly fungi. If confirmed, these would represent organisms living in conditions that, until recently, were assumed to be sterile. The contamination question around these findings has been serious and persistent. Drilling through 4 kilometers of ice without introducing surface microbes is extremely difficult, and several of the early Vostok results were challenged on precisely that basis. Later work at Lake Whillans, carried out with stricter contamination controls and cleaner drilling methods, confirmed the presence of living microbial communities in subglacial water. These were not fossil traces or degraded genetic material. They were active, metabolizing organisms, functioning in an environment that has been sealed off from the surface world for millions of years. The central question is where those organisms originated. One possibility is that they colonized the subglacial environment in relatively recent geological time, migrating through hydrological connections between lakes, or carried by the slow movement of ice and meltwater through the system. Subglacial hydrology beneath Antarctica is not static. Water moves between lakes along pressure gradients, and with it, potentially, biology. The other possibility is that these microbes descend from organisms that inhabited Antarctica before the ice arrived. Populations that were gradually buried, sealed off, and forced to adapt to conditions that grew steadily more extreme over millions of years. If the second scenario holds, even partially, then what lies beneath Antarctica's ice is not simply water and rock. It is a living biological connection to the Eocene, a remnant of the continent's former ecosystems, persisting in darkness. Large-bodied organisms almost certainly did not survive in subglacial conditions. The available energy in these environments is extremely limited. There is no photosynthesis. Chemical energy from mineral interactions is marginal at best, and the pressure is immense. Marsupials and giant penguins did not persist beneath the ice sheet. Nematodes, however, microscopic roundworms, have been found alive in modern Antarctic ice and permafrost. Some of these organisms can survive being frozen solid for decades, possibly centuries, and resume metabolic function once thawed. Tardigrades, microanimals known for their tolerance of extreme conditions, also inhabit Antarctic moss and lichen communities on the surface today. None of these qualify as complex animals in any conventional sense, but they demonstrate that multicellular organisms can survive at the outer boundary of what is considered habitable. If geothermal refugia exist beneath the ice, warm, wet pockets sustained by volcanic heat, operating on principles analogous to deep-sea hydrothermal vents, then the range of what might have survived grows wider, not into anything large-scale or dramatic, but into something continuous, a biological thread linking the Antarctica of today to the continent that existed before the ice. Antarctica is widely treated as a place where time stopped, a frozen archive with nothing left alive in it. The fossil record and the discoveries being made beneath the ice sheet tell a different story. Life on this continent was not extinguished. It was driven to its outer limits, compressed into progressively smaller and more extreme niches, pushed underground and underwater, and into forms that scientists are only now beginning to detect and catalog. 34 million years ago, a person standing on this continent could have walked through a beech forest with a canopy overhead. Marsupials moved through the leaf litter, while penguins taller than most adults hunted in productive coastal waters nearby. That world is largely gone. Beneath 4 kilometers of ice, though, in water that has not been exposed to sunlight since well before the human lineage began, something is still metabolically active. It has persisted there in one form or another for a very long time. We assume we understand what Antarctica is, but we have only examined the surface.